Matera ha cercato di realizzare quanto più possibile questa sinergia tra nuove tecnologie e storia, cultura per la valorizzazione del proprio patrimonio. Grazie.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Francesca. A very impressive contribution in which you talk about one of the most beautiful and rich culture cities of the Italian Peninsula and of the world. As a scholar with a literary background, I really appreciate the quotation of Pascoli, Carlo Levi, and Paolo Pasolini, but the most important element of your paper is perhaps the use of technologies at the service of inclusion and accessibility. On this point, I would like to come back later to the moment of discussion, but this theme will also be discussed later in the course of the study day, but in the paper by Carlo Corsato and Kate Devine. I now welcome the last speaker of this panel, Iris Pupella Nogue, who is a PhD student of Contemporary History at the University of Paris-Est and University of Trieste, with the thesis Negotiating Urban Spaces During Fascism in Trieste and Bolzano, 1922 to 1943. Previously, she graduated at the University of Roma III and the University of Paris-Est with a thesis on fascism and obtained a master's degree in public history at the University of Paris-Est. She worked as a documentary filmmaker with 02B Film and later for the TV news of the French TV TF1 for the research of archive images and news for documentaries and newscasts. Her teaching activity includes the courses La storia nei media and I monumenti fascisti a Trieste for the master's degree course Studi storici dall'antico al contemporaneo at the University of Trieste and in the course Analyse de l'indexation TV at INASUP, France. She has participated in numerous conferences in Italy, France, and Luxembourg, and in January 2017, she founded La Boîte à l'Histoire in Paris, an association of public history that organizes historical dissemination events. Thanks to Iris for being here with us. Now it's your turn with the relation in English entitled Public History and Fascist Monuments in the Towns of Bolzano and Trieste. Some examples of analysis and project. Iris, if you want, you can share your slides from your computer by sharing your screen. Otherwise, we can share them for you, but you have to tell us during your talk to move on to the next slide. Thank you.
Okay, but thank you very much. Maybe, yes, if you can share the slides yourself, it would be more easier for me if it's possible. Thank you. Yeah, perfect. So now I can move the slides. No, I don't know.
Okay, if you want, if you wanted to pass to the next slide, you have to tell us when we have to move.
Ah, okay, okay, I understand. Okay, well, so I will, yeah, I will tell you.
Okay, thank you.
I hope it would not be too complicated. Well, I'm starting now. So good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. And very thank you to all the Humanities for Change Network and for this amazing organization. I think it must not have been this easy. So I'm really thankful and I'm happy to be here. So I will start right now this presentation. You can switch to the next slide, please. Thank you. And I will start this presentation by using some words from Hannah Malone, who wrote that from 1945 to today, the fascist period has cast a long but indeterminate shadow over Italian culture and politics. Italians remember fascism in different ways, depending on their local context, personal circumstances, and political sympathies. So fascism is an absent presence in Italy, as its memory is alive, but distorted, fragmented, and obscured. So those divided memories can be felt by analyzing the remains of fascist monuments and buildings. And in this presentation, I will discuss how the memory of fascism through monuments has been managed by local authorities of two border cities, which is Trieste and Bolzano. And I will also analyzing some public history projects. Just before to start, I want to present some definitions to clarify my position. So you can switch to the next slide, please. Thank you. First of all, I wanted to tell how what is public history for me, and is before everything a practice. So as Stefano Dell'Aglio said just before me, and it is linked for this presentation to the question on how transmitting history outside of the academy. Also, for me, a monument is a structure erected to commemorate someone or something from the past, but it also builds a collective identity, as Henri Lefebvre said. It's also a narrative about the past, but it's not the past itself. Also, monuments say much more about the time in which they were built than about the event they commemorate. And finally, monuments help us to understand how certain groups or societies want to remember or to forget the past. You can switch to the next slide, please. Thank you. No, just before, but it's okay. Yeah, thank you. So why am I comparing those two cities? First of all, it's because the two cities were not Italian before the First World War, and they belonged to the Habsburg Empire. It's also two border cities with a multi-ethnic population, but not quite in the same proportion, because Germanophones are much more numerous in the city of Bolzano than the Slavic populations in the city of Trieste. And also the Italianization of the inhabitants' mentalities and of urban spaces started since the end of the war, but it is really fascism that used architecture and monuments to Italianize the spaces. And in fact, fascist Italy is the state that has the most politically invested architecture in Europe. So architecture has been a part of the politic conduct by the regime, and it invests urban landscape with a recognizable aesthetics. So architecture is an instrument of power from which the consensus of masses is reached, and it participates to the totalitarianization process of society. So you can switch to the next slide, please. Thank you. So here you can see some example of fascist monuments. So on your left, you have the Piazza Ubardani in Trieste with the Sacrario and the Casa del Combattente, etc. You also have the police station, which was the Casa del Fascio on your left. You can switch to the next slide, please. Thank you. You also have the Monumento ai Caduti on your left, and also the main university on your right. Then in Bolzano, you can switch. Thank you. Thank you. You have the famous Monumento alla Vittoria on your left, and also the central station. And you can switch. Thank you. And then you have the Army Corps Palace and the financial office today, which was the Casa del Fascio. Okay, you can switch to the next one, please. Thank you very much. I just wanted very quickly to talk about how monuments from the fascist period were used after the Second World War, because I think it will clear the future public history projects realized after it, and that we are going to see after. You can switch. Thank you. Thank you very much. So the two cities were occupied by the Third Reich after the fall of fascism until 1945, but they don't have the same issue of the Second World War. So Bolzano starts its democratic process with the creation, we can say, of the Südtiroler Volkspartei on the 8th of May 1945, which had since the beginning the will to defend the rights of the Germanophone community. after the violent denationalization operated during fascism. And so fascist monuments are quite in the center of polemics and materialize the tension between the two communities. And for example, the Monumento alla Vittoria that you can see remain used by the Italian community to commemorate the First World War and also the Italianità of Bolzano right after the Second World War. But the German community really questioned the presence of this fascist monument, and two voices were then in opposition. The one who considered the monument untouchable because it commemorates the dead of the First World War, and the one which wanted its simple destruction. So there have been numerous public demonstrations organized by political movements and associations where the Monumento alla Vittoria was the heart of the contestations. And on the 1st of October 1978, a bomb exploded at the Monumento alla Vittoria, which caused serious damages and after which the monument was fenced and in fact made inaccessible. So as Andrea Di Michele said, and I think he's here today with us, isolated by a gate, the monument did not lose its devising strength. As for Trieste, so you can switch, please. Thank you very much. So as for Trieste, from the 9th of June 1945, the city belonged to the A zone, which was managed by the Allied military government of occupied territories and became the Free Territory of Trieste. So during this period, Anglo-Americans reused some of the fascist buildings, such as the Questura, so the police station that you can see on the left, as headquarters. And this happened a lot, in one way, because there was no specific policy of defascistization to eliminate traces of dictatorship from Italian cities, but it also in another way because it satisfies practical needs, as we can see for La Questura. Also, the TV or cinema news programs created by Anglo-Americans often show the city by its most important monuments. So that included fascist monuments, such as the Monumento ai Caduti that you saw before, but also the Faro alla Vittoria that you can see now on the right. But fascism in those programs was never mentioned. And indeed, the excuse served by Anglo-Americans was that those monuments were built to commemorate the First World War. So as a consequence, the presence of fascist monuments was very rarely questioned. And also fascist monuments we can say, kept their original symbolic purposes for the Italian community as being marks of the Italianity of the city. So now we are going in the heart of our subject. You can switch, please. Thank you. And I am going to present two kinds of public history projects made in those two cities. First project is guided tours and second project is museums. So yeah, thank you for the slide. So I'm starting with guided tours. In 2003, the city of Trieste, I'm starting with Trieste now, created a free brochure in Italian, English, and German, which proposed a guided tour of all fascist monuments, but it was called rationalist architecture, so rationalist guided tour. And in fact, fascism was, but the fascist period was merely presented. So the accent was more on the architectural aspect than the historical one. And the brochure was available at the tourist office and the city hall, but nothing was marked in the urban landscape, no? So near the fascist monuments to give some more explanation. Today, the city still proposes this brochure, which has been a bit modified with like new photos, and the Slovenian language is now also available. But once again, the fascism isn't even mentioned, and it's still the word rationalist architecture that is used, which we can't say it's wrong, but I think it's good to underline that this rationalist architecture has a context. So it has been made in a very precise context, which is fascism. And also often those rationalist monuments have inscriptions on them, which are typical of the fascist rhetoric. I don't know if you remember, but the Monumento ai Caduti in Trieste have this, this inscription where the First World War is qualified of liberation war for the city of Trieste. And I think this inscription must be explained to the visitors who are visiting Trieste. So that's for Trieste. And for Bolzano, so in the beginning of 2020, the city of Bolzano also proposed a free brochure in the same type of Trieste's one, so in Italian, German, Latin, and English. And it's in this brochure that you can see on the screen, the term fascism appears clearly, and it is focused on the history and on the architecture of the fascist period in Bolzano. And the fun fact is that there is even a tour, especially for cyclists, which I think represents in a very good way as the city of Bolzano. So after speaking of guided tours, I want to speak about museum now, so you can switch, please. Thank you. And I'm starting with Bolzano example for this time. So in 2011, Bolzano's county and the city of Bolzano decided to gather a group of people from both of the language communities whose purpose was to create a permanent exhibition inside of the Monumento alla Vittoria. And it was a project which was asked for a long time from the inhabitants to, in fact, do something that could explain this, this period, could explain what happened, sorry. And the exhibition was inaugurated in July 2014. So the exhibition is in the undergrounds, as you can see on the picture of the monuments. And for me, it really succeeds to, so using very different documents from videos to posters in a very, we can say, modern scenography to present, it succeeds to present the history of the construction and we can say the life of the monument, adding some reflection on how, for example, it has been perceived from the inhabitants, but also used by the different political regimes that succeeded until today. But it also succeeds to tell and reflect on the history of Bolzano during fascism, but also during the Nazi occupation, which is quite important. Also, the group installed an object outside, which is a LED light ring that circles one of the Lictorian fasces of the monument. So outside of the monument, where is the title of the exhibition, which is, as you can see, Bolzano 1945, one monument, one city, two dictatorships. So that object outside is to notify to any person that came along the monument that there is something, that the monument is not only kept that way as simple as it is. No, there is something to explain this monument. The exhibition, in fact, has been received in a very positive way from the inhabitants, but also from the academy. And it received a special commendation of the European Museum of the Year Award in 2016, which had said that the exhibition is an example of what can be done with triumphalist architectural heritage that exists throughout the world. And it is a highly courageous and professional initiative to promote humanism, tolerance, and democracy. And I really agree with that. In other ways, so you have Trieste, so you can switch, please. Thank you very much. You also have a museum in Trieste, which is the Museum of Risorgimento, and which is in the Oberdan Square that you saw before. So this museum was opened in 1934, and it presents the history of Risorgimento in Trieste. So once again, to emphasize the Italianità of Trieste, there is the same example of the same period in Trento, in the city of Trento. So it presents, the history of Risorgimento and also the First World War, with a series, as you can say, of objects, sculptures, paintings, and everything. And all of those themes were presented following the very fascist rhetoric. So there is no mention of the Slavic community, for example, or there is no mention of how violent the First World War was for civilians. So the museum is now managed by the city council, but almost nothing has changed since the opening. So even the lights are still from the 30s. The monument is, the museum is open to the public, but only by appointment. And the city organizes visits for schools. I also went to the website of this museum, and the thing that surprised me is that the fascist period of fascismo isn't even mentioned. So I think that's quite tell a lot. And in fact, local historians disagree on what to do with this museum. So there is, for example, Gaetano Dato, who underlined that this was a fascist museum, clearly, but he thinks that the city must leave it as it is, because it allows to show how fascism used to talk about the Risorgimento and the First World War. And according to Dato, the museum is also a monument, of course, but also a document, because it shows how the Trieste Italianità was represented during the fascist period. But for others, historians, it is impossible to leave it as it is now, and that the fascist periods and also those representation of Risorgimento and First World War must be explained to visitors, and especially the young ones. So the debate, I think it's quite still open. So in conclusion, and you can switch to the next, please. I want to say that since 2015, there are social movements, for example, for decolonizing urban spaces, such as, and you can switch, please. Thank you very much. Such as Rhodes Must Fall monument in South Africa, which is against the statue of Cecil Rhodes in the University, of Cape Town, on the Cape Town campus. So it's the picture that you can see on the left. But there is also the movement Black Lives Matter, which is from US to Europe, have a great success. And as you can see on the picture on the right, the statue of Idro Montanelli, which was covered in a red paint and tagged during a protest of Black Lives Matter movement in Milan this summer 2020. So all this social movement provokes, I think, new questions for historians, such as what is a monument and why do monuments matter? And also, more important, what is the role of historians? And as, so you can switch, please. Thank you. And for this, I want to give some example that Thomas Covin, who's a professor of public history at the University of Luxembourg, and who is the president of the International Federation of Public History. So that's the thing that he said to his students. So the first thing to do is foster public discussion to see if the monument is unwanted and by whom, but also that in any case, removing the monument without discussion does not solve the problem. So as conclusion, I think that in Bolzano, public history projects initiated by the city, so there are a few more public history projects, I only presented the museum, but those public history projects initiated by the city in, I think, a real collaboration with local historians, archivists, and inhabitants are really interesting, and I think they do work. Because the autonomous region and the city understand that those projects and behind them the work of explaining this contemporary history of the city was a necessity to appease the tension between communities. But I think it's also because the German community has a majority of population in this region. So its revendications have a real echo for local authorities. For Trieste, instead, we can talk about quite a missed opportunity in un'occasione mancata, you can say in Italian, to face this past, this fascist past, through questioning the presence of fascist monuments. And in fact, fascist monuments in Trieste, we can say, quite melted in the urban landscape. Monuments built during fascism had this objective to underline the Italianità of the city. And we can say that today they still have this function. And in fact, tensions between Italians and the Slavic communities, so Slovene, Croats, and Serbian, are still quite vivid. But I think there is hope. And in fact, the creation of a public history course in the University of Trieste by the professor Tulia Catalan in the autumn 2020, so right now, which is composed with students coming from every part of Italy. So that is not only students from Trieste. All of this will certainly allow new questions and new ideas on how transmitting the history of the fascist period in Trieste through the presence of fascist monuments. So you can switch. Thank you, and thank you all for your attention. And if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Iris. A very interesting contribution. It is now time to open a discussion of this first panel. So I invite those who want to ask a question to activate the microphone, and if they wish, also the camera. Otherwise, if you want, you can write your thoughts in the chat or tell us that you wanted to intervene, and we will give you the floor. Are there any questions? Okay, I have a question in the chat. I would like to ask to Francesca Vera Romano if she could explain more about the project Archivio della Memoria di Matera and its method on gathering and processing informations.
Sure, I take my presentation back so I can show it better. Right, 1 second, please. I have to share the screen first. See my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I will explain it in English or in Italian. This is the question in English.
The question is in English.
So this archive is in construction, and it will be useful because we'll connect. It's a sort of mnemothèque. So it's an archive of the memory that can reconstruct collective memory of the territory of Matera through the reconnection and the scheduling and digitalization of historical elements like pictures, for example, of the period of Sassi, with the photographs of maybe also Cartier-Bresson, all the photographers that tried to make a sort of shot on what was the peasants' culture, because one of the most important things in the Matera culture is the rural culture. So all the things about the peasant and rural culture. And is a sort of reconnection and recollection of pictures coming from private archives, or maybe also public archives, but they will be reconnected together. So it's a sort of virtual archive of everything that can be considered historically important for the peasant culture of Matera. So the name is Museo Virtuale della Memoria Collettiva,